What if I told you that the weakest man in any room isn't the one with no muscles, no money, or even no confidence? It's the man everyone thinks is strong. You know the type. Works out religiously, projects confidence, follows all the alpha male advice, performs masculinity perfectly. Society calls him strong. Carl Jung called him something else entirely. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why this man is weaker than he appears, while the man who embraces his full humanity possesses strength that performance can never create. Or maybe you're that man performing strength while feeling hollow inside. But first, let me show you exactly what I mean. You walk into a gym and see two men. At one station, there's Marcus, lifting heavy, checking himself in every mirror, posting his workout on social media, classic alpha male performance. At another station, there's David, training quietly, sometimes struggling with weights, sometimes resting when he needs to, unbothered by performing strength for anyone watching. Who would you bet on to possess real strength? Hold that thought, because what I'm about to tell you will flip everything you believe about masculinity. Marcus will go home and feel empty despite the validation. David just completed a workout that actually serves his life. Marcus is performing strength because he's terrified of appearing weak. David has integrated his strength and weakness into something authentic. So why does everyone think Marcus represents strength and David represents weakness? Here's the uncomfortable truth. You celebrate Marcus because he validates everything you believe about what makes a man strong. That it requires constant performance, emotional suppression, and aggressive dominance. Jung spent his entire life studying men like David. And what he discovered was this: society doesn't fear weak men. We fear men who are comfortable with their full humanity because they prove that everything we've been taught about masculinity is a performance that creates weakness, not strength. But here's what Jung knew that nobody talks about. The truly strong man isn't the one who never shows weakness. He's the one who has integrated his shadow, his vulnerability, his full range of human experience. While everyone else is performing a narrow definition of masculinity, he's operating from wholeness. And that wholeness, that's exactly what will change your understanding of strength. But to understand why, we need to dig into the one thing that makes men more uncomfortable than anything else. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But what happens when becoming who you truly are means rejecting everything society told you about being a man? If you've ever felt exhausted from performing masculinity, this video is for you. Like, subscribe, and let's discover real strength together. Leave a comment about the moment you realized that performing strength was making you weaker. That's the man who possesses real strength. He's a walking contradiction that breaks traditional masculinity, has power without dominance, confidence without performance, strength without suppression, can be vulnerable without being weak, emotional without being unstable, gentle without being passive. And this terrifies us because if strength doesn't require emotional suppression, if power doesn't demand constant dominance displays, if masculinity doesn't need the performance of never struggling, then what does that say about the exhausting act you've been performing your entire life? But here's where it gets really interesting. Jung discovered something that explains why performing strength creates the weakness it's trying to hide. And it has everything to do with what he called the shadow. Remember that discomfort you feel around men who are comfortable being vulnerable? Jung had a name for it. And once you understand what it is, you'll never see masculinity the same way again. Quick question. When was the last time you allowed yourself to be fully human? Not performing strength, not suppressing emotions, not avoiding vulnerability because real men don't show weakness. Just being honest about your full experience as a human being. Can't remember? That's the problem. Jung discovered that our obsession with performing strength isn't about being strong. It's about avoiding the parts of ourselves we've been taught make us weak. He called this the shadow, the parts of ourselves we reject, suppress, and deny. And in masculine culture, the biggest shadow is anything perceived as weakness. Vulnerability, emotion, uncertainty, struggle, need for connection. But here's what Jung knew. We perform strength. We suppress our emotions. We avoid vulnerability and display dominance. Not because it makes us strong, but because we're terrified of the shadow we've been told makes us unworthy of being called men. Think about the last time you struggled with something. Did you ask for help? Or did you suffer alone because asking for help would make you appear weak? The truly strong man doesn't perform in vulnerability. He's not suppressing his emotions to prove his strength. He's not even afraid of being seen struggling. And somehow this is the part that breaks people's brains. He's often more respected, more successful, and more genuinely powerful than men performing alpha dominance. Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." What makes 99% of men weak isn't lack of muscles or dominance. It's that they're controlled by unconscious shadow material they refuse to integrate. They're performing a version of masculinity that requires rejecting half of their humanity. They're calling their emotional suppression strength when it's actually just fragility disguised as toughness. But what if the problem isn't that men aren't strong enough? What if the problem is that the definition of strength you've been sold creates weakness by design? Here's what the alpha male influencers don't want you to know. Suppressing your emotions doesn't make you strong, it makes you fragile. Everything you've been taught about masculine strength is designed to keep you weak. Jung wrote, "What you resist persists." Every emotion you suppress doesn't disappear. It grows in your unconscious, controlling your behavior from the shadows. The truly strong man understands something most never access. Strength comes from integration, not suppression. While you're performing invulnerability, they're processing their emotions and becoming genuinely resilient. While you're avoiding vulnerability, they're building connections that create actual support systems. While you're displaying dominance to prove strength, they're developing inner authority that doesn't need validation. This is why your performance of strength keeps you weak. You're not building resilience. You're building a brittle facade that shatters when real pressure comes. Remember Marcus from the gym? While David was training in alignment with his actual capacity, Marcus was lifting to perform for others, destroying his body to maintain an image, creating injuries that will weaken him for years. His performance of strength was actually self-destruction disguised as discipline. Jung called this shadow integration. When your conscious mind stops rejecting parts of yourself and integrates them into wholeness, you become genuinely strong rather than performing strong. But here's the really crazy part. This integration feels weak at first. It feels like you're becoming soft. It feels like you're losing your edge. And that's exactly the programming designed to keep you trapped in performed masculinity that benefits people selling you supplements, courses, and validation of your desperate need to feel like a man. Jung believed that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. The truly strong man has accepted his complete humanity, and that acceptance gives him access to something performance can never provide: genuine resilience that doesn't crack under pressure, authentic confidence that doesn't need constant validation, real power that comes from wholeness rather than from dominance displays. Now we get to the real reason society creates weak men through toxic masculinity. And it's not what you think. This isn't about individual strength. This is about control. Jung wrote, "The healthy man does not torture others. Generally, it is the tortured who turn into torturers. But society needs tortured men who will torture themselves and others to maintain systems of control." Think about it. Our entire masculine paradigm depends on one belief: that your worth as a man comes from suppressing your humanity and performing narrow definitions of strength. You're taught from childhood that boys don't cry. You learn that emotions are weakness. You're told that real men don't need help, don't show vulnerability, don't admit struggle. The man who integrates his shadow looks at this system and asks one simple question: why would I reject half of my humanity to fit a definition of masculinity that makes me miserable? And nobody has a good answer. They have wholeness without performance, strength without suppression, power without dominance. This makes them uncontrollable. Uncontrollable men are dangerous to systems that depend on insecure men seeking validation through consumption. But here's the deeper fear that keeps toxic masculinity alive. What if integrated men are actually stronger? What if emotional intelligence creates better leaders than emotional suppression? What if vulnerability builds deeper connections than performed invulnerability? If that's true, then generations of men have been weakened by the very culture that promised to make them strong. They've been suppressing their emotions, rejecting vulnerability, and performing dominance in ways that created fragility, isolation, and ultimate weakness. The truly strong man represents proof that there's another way, a way that doesn't require rejecting your humanity or performing a narrow version of masculinity. Jung observed, "Your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." The truly strong man looks inside, and what he sees there doesn't match what alpha male culture tells him a man should be. But here's where this gets personal, because Jung himself was the perfect example of what happens when a man refuses to perform traditional masculinity and instead integrates his full humanity. Carl Jung was literally the man who rejected performed masculinity of his time, and his story proves this. His colleagues thought he was too interested in emotions and the unconscious. The academic world called him unscientific and mystical. Society labeled him as brilliant but not properly masculine for his era. Jung spent years doing what looked like weakness to traditional masculine standards, exploring his own emotions deeply, admitting his struggles publicly, integrating what others called his feminine side. Sound familiar? That's exactly what people say about men who refuse to perform today. But here's what Jung knew that his critics didn't. He had accepted something profound, that integrating his shadow made him stronger than suppressing it ever could, that exploring his emotions gave him insights suppression would have missed, that accepting his full humanity created wholeness that performance could never achieve. And from that acceptance came insights that revolutionized psychology, the collective unconscious, the shadow, anima and animus, individuation, psychological types. All of these concepts shape how we understand human nature today. They all emerged from what looked like emotional weakness, but was actually the deepest psychological exploration any man had undertaken. This is the pattern with history's strongest men. They appeared weak to their contemporaries because they weren't performing narrow masculinity. Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively about his struggles and emotions. Ernest Hemingway's tough guy image hid his later admission that performed masculinity nearly destroyed him. Viktor Frankl found meaning through embracing rather than suppressing suffering. But traditional masculine culture calls emotional honesty weakness because men comfortable with their humanity threaten industries built on male insecurity. The truly strong man today is following the same pattern, and just like Jung, he's not trying to prove his masculinity through performance or dominance displays. He's integrating his shadow, processing his emotions, and building wholeness that makes him genuinely powerful rather than just appearing powerful. And that integration looks like weakness to men trapped in performance mode. Here's what Jung knew that our culture is still learning. The truly strong man isn't the one who never appears weak. He's the one who has made peace with his full humanity. But maybe you're starting to recognize yourself in this description. Maybe you're exhausted from performing masculinity. Jung wrote, "Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people. But knowing your own darkness requires courage to see these signs in yourself. Let me show you these signs. If you recognize them, understanding this will change your entire life as a man." First sign, you feel exhausted from maintaining your masculine image. While other men seem energized by performing dominance, you feel drained by it. Every interaction where you have to prove your strength leaves you feeling hollow. You'd rather be authentic and risk judgment than perform and feel fake. That's not weakness. That's your authentic self rejecting a role that doesn't fit. Second sign, your relationships feel shallow because you can't show vulnerability. Traditional alpha males claim they don't need deep connection. You crave it, but don't know how to create it while maintaining your masculine image. You have plenty of surface-level friendships, but no one who really knows you. Every time you consider opening up, fear of appearing weak stops you. Sound familiar? That's not emotional weakness. That's human need for connection being suppressed by toxic programming. Third sign, your anger comes out in ways you can't control because you've suppressed all your other emotions. You don't cry, don't express fear, don't show uncertainty, but rage erupts unexpectedly. Jung called this the shadow acting out. When you suppress emotions through the front door, they come through the windows. Your inability to express the full range of emotions makes you less controlled, not more. Fourth sign. You respect men who show appropriate vulnerability more than men who perform in vulnerability. When a man admits he's struggling, something in you feels relief and respect. When a man performs perfect strength, something in you feels distrust. You've noticed that the men you most admire are comfortable being human, not performing being machines. Fifth sign. Your performance of strength has created health problems, relationship problems, or both. The stress of never relaxing, never being vulnerable, never admitting struggle manifests physically: high blood pressure, digestive issues, or worse. Emotionally, relationships fail because no one can connect with your performance. You're physically or emotionally breaking down from the weight of the mask. Sixth sign. You feel more powerful when you're alone and can drop the act than when you're performing strength for others. In private, you can be your full self. In public, you're exhausting yourself with performance. The gap between your private self and public persona is growing. True strength would feel consistent, not context-dependent. Seventh sign. Advice about being more alpha makes you feel more trapped, not more free. You read the alpha male content and feel constricted. You hear the never show weakness speeches and feel exhausted. Something in you knows this path leads to brittleness, not strength, even though everyone says otherwise. You've been taught to see these signs as weakness that needs fixing. You've been told you need to be more alpha, more dominant, more emotionally suppressed. Jung would tell you to stop. He'd tell you that your exhaustion from performance is wisdom, not weakness. When you stop rejecting your humanity and start integrating it, you gain access to real strength. Not the brittle performance that shatters under pressure, but genuine resilience that comes from wholeness, from accepting your full range of human experience. This is why integrated men handle crisis better. When you're not exhausting yourself maintaining a performance, you have capacity for real challenges. This is why they build deeper relationships. When you're not hiding behind a masculine mask, people can actually connect with who you are. But accepting this truth that real strength comes from integration, not performance. That's the hardest part. Now comes the practical question. How do you develop real strength in a culture that defines masculinity through performance and suppression? Jung believed that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. But once you see that performed masculinity creates weakness, you need a path to actual strength. First, start naming your emotions instead of suppressing them. You don't have to broadcast every feeling. But privately acknowledging "I'm feeling anxious" or "I'm struggling with this" stops the emotion from controlling you unconsciously. Suppressed emotions control you from the shadows. Named emotions become information you can work with. This is strength, conscious relationship with your inner experience rather than unconscious avoidance. Second, distinguish between vulnerability and weakness. Weakness is being unable to handle challenges. Vulnerability is being honest about your human experience while handling challenges. You can be vulnerable about struggling while still being capable. You can admit uncertainty while still taking action. Strong men are vulnerable. Weak men perform invulnerability to hide their weakness. Third, develop what Jung called shadow integration. Notice what you judge harshly in other men. That's often your shadow. The emotions you reject, the needs you deny, the qualities you call weak. Instead of rejecting them, explore why they threaten you. When you integrate your shadow, you become whole rather than fractured. Wholeness is genuine strength. Performance is brittle facade. But here's the most important part. You have to stop measuring your masculinity by other men's performances. Society wants you to compare yourself to alpha males performing dominance. Masculine influencers promise strength through emotional suppression. Social media celebrates performed masculinity over authentic humanity. But Jung understood something deeper. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. That journey doesn't happen through performance. Your strength might look different than traditional masculinity. Your power might come from integration rather than dominance. Your masculinity might include emotional intelligence, vulnerability, and wholeness. And that's not weakness. That's evolution beyond performed masculinity into genuine strength. Think about it. Every truly strong man in history was called weak for refusing to perform. Jung himself was criticized for being too emotional, too introspective, too interested in what alpha culture calls weakness. His approach seemed unmasculine for decades to men trapped in performance. But when his insights about integration started proving more effective than suppression, everything he'd been teaching suddenly became undeniable. His supposed weakness turned out to be strength that men performing masculinity could never access. The same pattern happens over and over. The man everyone called weak for being vulnerable suddenly demonstrates resilience that performed strength never created. Because while everyone else was suppressing emotions that would eventually destroy them, he was integrating them into wholeness. While others were performing invulnerability that created isolation, he was building genuine connections through authenticity. While others were displaying dominance to hide insecurity, he was developing inner authority that needed no performance. Here's what nobody tells you about real strength. It will prove itself through crisis, not through performance. Let me say it again. Jung wrote, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." You've been choosing wholeness while everyone else performs partial humanity. You've been integrating your shadow while they've been suppressing it. And that integration gives you something performance can never provide. The ability to handle real pressure without shattering, to maintain relationships through difficulty, to remain grounded when men performing strength fall apart. But your strength won't announce itself through dominance displays. It won't fit the alpha male narrative that social media celebrates. Instead, it will reveal itself quietly, naturally, in moments of real pressure. The crisis where you remain steady while men performing strength crumble. The relationship challenge where your emotional intelligence creates resolution while performed masculinity creates destruction. The life transition where your integration allows adaptation while rigid performance creates breakdown. And when that moment comes, all the years of being called weak will reveal themselves as the path to genuine strength. Every time you chose vulnerability over performance was actually you building resilience. Every time you integrated emotions rather than suppressing them was actually you developing genuine power. Society creates weak men through toxic masculinity because weak men are easier to control through insecurity. They prove that maybe the problem isn't men who won't perform strength. Maybe the problem is a masculine culture that pathologizes human wholeness and tries to force everyone into narrow performances that create the weakness they claim to prevent. If you're a man who feels exhausted from performing masculinity, if your strength includes vulnerability and emotional honesty, if you've been called weak despite possessing resilience that performance never creates, Jung would recognize you immediately. You're not weak. You're not failed masculinity. You're not less of a man. You're developing real strength through integration while others develop brittle facades through performance. The question isn't whether you're man enough. The question is whether you'll have the courage to continue integrating your full humanity while everyone tells you that makes you weak. Because Jung was right. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And sometimes the strongest thing a man can do is embrace his full humanity rather than perform a narrow definition of masculinity, even when the world calls that weakness. The truly strong man isn't society's failure. He's proof that performed masculinity creates the weakness it claims to prevent, and that's exactly why insecure men fear him. If this video made you see strength differently, or if you recognize the exhaustion of performed masculinity in your own life, let me know in the comments. What's the moment you realized that being vulnerable required more strength than performing invulnerability? And if you want more content that challenges everything toxic masculinity taught you about being a man, subscribe and hit that notification bell, because we're just getting started with truths that alpha male influencers don't want you to hear.